In today's photo deconstruction, I'm going to show you how I use two optical spots to create beautiful dappled light across the subject and the background in this warm beauty image. Hey everybody, Lindsay Adler here, and as you know, I'm more than a little bit obsessed with optical spots. I love an optical spot because it allows me to create an immense amount of control in my images. Now, if you're unfamiliar, an optical spot allows you to create tight slices of light on your subject. Or you can add something called a gobo to cast patterns or textures of light. And that's what we're doing in this image. Now, first of all, this photograph was taken as part of one of my fashion intensive workshops. I run these every year, sometimes even twice a year. These are hands-on opportunities that allow photographers to not only learn about posing and lighting and fashion photography, but even the business side of it. And so this is one of the images we created during my last fashion intensive. All right, so taking a look at the shot, I actually want to bounce over, show you what we did with the lighting, and then we're going to come back and break down the retouch. So looking behind the scenes here. All right, so let's actually start with the concept of the image. The idea here is that I wanted to create something that felt luxury, elevated, warm, like that was the concept I was going for. And so I began by choosing warm elements. So I had the warm skin tone of my subject and her warm hair and the warm color of the background, which actually brings me to the background. Here I'm using a background. It's hand-painted canvas by Gravity Backdrops. This is a medium texture beige. And so I love this because it's light, but it has a little bit of detail, which makes it a little bit more interesting than just perhaps shooting on a seamless paper background. It'll give me more depth, particularly when I'm doing this lighting effect. All right, so let's actually take a look at our main light. So this is our first optical spot. This optical spot is pointed at the subject's face and probably a little bit of light hitting the background, but in it I've placed a leaves gobo. And so a leaves gobo gives you the effect of, maybe you've heard it before, cucoloris or cookie, where it's just kind of broken up light. And what's nice about the optical spot is that you can focus the lens on the front to make it razor sharp. So if I wanted to see the exact crisp outlines of the leaves, I could, but that's not the intention. It's more meant to be just little tiny pockets of texture of light, basically to make the lighting more interesting, to make it more complex. And so I actually defocus the lens on the front of the modifier. And that's what's going to give me the little pocket of light result. So that is optical spot number one, and for that I'm using the kit lens that comes with the optical spot itself. This is a fantastic lens if you want a lot of output of light and if you're shooting a beauty shot or maybe a head and shoulder shot. But I created this image and I was shooting it and I saw the little pockets of light on the subject, but then the background kind of just fell flat. And at first I was wondering, okay, should I add maybe just like a grid for a little bit of glow behind my subject, or maybe I light the background? But what made the most sense to me was to also put another optical spot there. So the dappled light on the face would match the dappled light on the background. Now just one little note. Originally I had it so that the dappled light on the face, the optical spot, was also hitting the background. The problem is, based on the subject's distance, it changed the brightness of the dappled light. So the dappled light on her face would be much brighter than the background, as well as the sharpness of the edges. So the fact that the background was further away, that distance actually made the edges of the leaves sharper on the background than on my subject. So in the end, I decided it was better to just separate the two. So we had optical spot number one, and let's look at our optical spot number two. You can see it over here on the right-hand side. So for this one, I wanted a greater spread of light. I wanted to fill more of the background. So I used the optical spot, the leaves gobo again, but this time I changed out the lens. Now, if you check in the description below, there are several videos that explain what an optical spot is and switching out the lenses and all of those details, as if this is new to you. The lens that I used in this case was a Canon lens. It's a Canon EF 24-70. What's nice about this is it's not as bright, but it gives me a wider spread of light. And so you can actually see in the behind the scenes that even at such a close distance, it's basically covering the entire background. So I get the dappled light on her face as well as the dappled light in the background using two different optical spots. All right, now as I shot this, everything looked beautiful and rich, but looking at her face, the shadows were really dark, especially in her hair. And for that reason, I added my fill light, which you can see over here to the right-hand side. It is an extra large umbrella with diffusion, which basically just means a giant soft light source. Whenever I am adding a fill to the scene, I place it as close on to where the camera is as possible to just lift up the shadows. It's basically just meant to make sure I have shadow detail. And that's what this is doing in this case. All right, so before we take a look at the retouching, let's talk a little bit about my camera settings. Now for this shot, I was shooting with my go-to lens, which is a 24-105. The reason I like this is it gives me a lot of flexibility. So I can shoot a wide frame, or I can pop in for a close beauty shot without having to change my lens. The aperture in this case, I shot at an f4.0, which is the widest this lens goes, which means I have a little bit of a narrow depth of field without totally blurring out the background. My thought process here is I wanted to focus the attention on my subject's face, but let the background fall just a little bit soft. And so that's why a 4.0 aperture was appropriate for this. Okay, so now let's pop over to see what I captured in camera versus what I did with raw processing versus what I did with my retouching. All right, so this is, of course, the final image, but here is where we started. And I think one of the things I want you to notice is this is straight out of camera. There were no adjustments to the white balance or to the contrast or the clarity. This is exactly what I captured. And I think it's beautiful. I would be more than happy to show this as the final result. But as I was analyzing the image, I remembered what my fundamental goal was, which was to create an image that was warm and luxury and elevated. And I thought for that purpose, it would be best to warm up the white balance. And so what I did is, this is what I achieved in Capture One. Again, it could be Lightroom or whatever raw processor that you're using, but I warmed up the white balance. I added a little bit of yellows to the highlights and a little bit of red magentas to the shadows. And so you can kind of see how everything just warms up a bit. Now, before going into post and doing the retouching part, I started to analyze what I wanted to change. A couple of things, maybe some wrinkles in the neck, but honestly, she's perfect. I mean, she looks incredible. Tiny bit of texture on the face, which I also want to mention that an optical spot is hard light. Hard light shows imperfections, but you can see here that beautiful makeup and the right position of the lighting, as well as the quality of the subject's skin, can make it so that an optical spot can look beautiful out of camera. So some other things I'm thinking, I could maybe round out her afro to be more even everywhere, maybe make it a little bit more circular, maybe even a little bit larger. And then the way that I have her chin up and her head tilted, it makes some features look slightly asymmetrical. And one of the things that we find visually pleasing, especially in beauty photography, is symmetry. So that's a couple of the things I might want to fix. And then maybe some wrinkles in the shirt. So straight out of camera, raw processing, and then here's my retouch. So you can see that I clean up a little bit on the hands, I fix the hair, and you'll also notice that some of the highlights where the main light was hitting the hair, I actually brought out more of the detail. I wanted to show the texture of her hair rather than just being a large mass. I wanted to actually show some of that curl pattern. And so I think one of the biggest changes really is fixing a little symmetry and evening out the afro. So where we started and where we finished for this shot. I think this looks incredibly beautiful and elevated. This could be a portrait that I'm doing for somebody that's meant to be moody, it's meant to be rich, or it could be a jewelry campaign, an advertisement. It could be a fashion editorial. And so although you can do a lot with a single optical spot, sometimes having two so that you can layer the light can give you a lot more control. Now, if you'd like to see the gear that was used in the making of this image, be sure to check out the links below. I have the optical spots, I have the different controls and the modifiers and the strobes that I use. And of course, if you've enjoyed this photo deconstruction, you'll definitely want to like and subscribe because I have tons of these videos coming your way. See you next time, guys.